Good evening, Facebook friends, citizens of America and the planet. Welcome to this edition of Facebook Live. We're coming to you in what is usually Ajamu Baraka's program time called A Voice from the Margins. And in that theme, we're going to be talking about another issue and another voice from the margins, in this case addressing the issue of Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline. And we're very fortunate to have with us tonight an engineer who works in this area of energy and pipelines and power plants and all that. But this is a very special engineer because he also happens to be a person of indigenous origin, not actually from the Standing Rock Sioux, but in fact from the Ojibwe Chippewa tribes, also from North Dakota. And he, in fact, was brought back specifically to look into the issue of the Dakota Access Pipeline as part of this environmental review, which is required of, any major pipeline project where indigenous lands and resources and waters are going to be encroached on. So I want to introduce our guest tonight, whose name is Steve Martin. And Steve is actually coming to us at something like 4 a.m. In Turkey, where he resides, doing some of the work that he does in the energy industry. And he got up very early this morning in order to be with us. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. Maybe you can start us off just by giving a very brief description of how you came to be involved in the Standing Rock Dakota Access Pipeline.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me, Jill. I got into this entire, the Standing Rock issue first on my own accord. I woke up, and I looked at what was happening. I heard all about Standing Rock from the youth, basically, all of the awareness that had been drawn to this issue, and saw that something didn't feel right. Looking at this, a crude oil pipeline under a freshwater lake. With my knowledge of the industry across the world, I'd never heard of such an occurrence before, of doing an application like this. And so I began researching to see whether this had ever happened before. And the answer was no. This will be a world record of putting crude oil in a large diameter bore under a freshwater lake. That was one thing that drew me into it. And then also, the compelling question of, surely they must have looked at other alternatives. So I basically began to research, and I wrote a few posts on Facebook, and those got around quite actively in the early part of December. And then both the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe reached out to me to ask me if I would come back and engage
those
with them.
Those got around quite actively in the early part.
I was so honored to do.
Thank you, and really appreciate how you've been getting the word out. And I just want to, inform or remind our viewers that, it's really ironic that we're talking about this now, because Donald Trump and the Army Corps of Engineers have just basically decided they're going to do an end run around the whole scientific process, which is to say they're going to do an end run around the entire safety process. But we know that the Standing Rock Sioux are not giving up. They're going to fight this in the courts. They're going to fight, they're going to stand their ground at Standing Rock. And people all over the country are also standing their ground, divesting and calling attention to to the dangers going on here. So it's not a done deal, even though they've decided they're not going to pay attention to the scientific study. But I think it's so important for all of the people out there who are standing up for safety, standing up for justice, standing up for indigenous rights. It's really important that people know what it is that you're talking about. And I was shocked when I read the piece that you had posted on the Facebook page the other day about why this is so uniquely dangerous. Tell us what's going on. Why is it dangerous to have this pipeline, this big, heavy, clunky pipeline that stretches for like a mile and a quarter, a mile and a half almost, underneath a freshwater lake. What is dangerous about that?
There are a couple of major dangers as a mechanical engineer looking at this. First of all, when you look at the risks involved with construction, there are a lot of risks. As you mentioned, it's a huge, heavy pipeline that's going to be stretched like a rubber band, basically. Now, there are certain mitigations that you can do before you install the pipe. You can do some inspections, but even with that, the regulations around pipeline inspection only require them to inspect about 10% of the critical welds. So they don't even have to do 100% weld inspection when that goes in the ground. Now, one could argue that, well, we'll voluntarily do 100% inspection. Well, that's great. Do it. But then once you get the pipeline in the ground, there's a lot of trauma that can happen to those welds as it's stretched and as it's wound around, underneath the ground and put into place. There's actually no way after that to actually inspect those welds. There are ways to inspect the main body of the pipe, but not those girth welds. And there's 178 major welds that put these 40-foot sections of pipe together. And so there's a very high likelihood that there will be some problems that will be, stretching, cracking. Some leaks will be probably prevalent within the first year to 2 years because of some of those risks. Now, what's more important to understand, it's actually not illegal to leak oil. You can actually leak oil and not be, outside of law. So put that into context. There's a pipe 90 feet under the ground that has, it's a world record. It's not illegal to leak oil. Now, in addition to that, we don't even have the technology available to even detect whether it's leaking or not. So the concept or the notion that they're doing state-of-the-art technology, that this is actually, something that's been done over and over and over around the world, and it's the best and the safest pipeline in the world, is absolute fantasy.
Let me jump in for a second, Steve.
Sure.
You're breaking up a little bit, at least as far as I'm able to hear. So I want to repeat some of the things that you said, which were pretty amazing, just to be sure that our viewers get this. This pipeline underneath a drinking water lake is going to stretch for almost 1.5 miles, 90 feet below the surface. And it's going to be welded piece by piece as it gets inserted, as it sort of gets pushed down to a 90-foot level, and then it gets turned, so it's going downwards, and then it gets turned to go horizontal. And it's under enormous pressure as it gets pushed along to stretch 1.5 miles under this lake. Did I get that right?
For the most part. The only correction I would make is that the actual 178 40-foot sections are completely pre-assembled and welded above ground, and then in one attempt they try to insert it. So it's like a long tube is built, and then they try to, and pipes are flexible, they stretch, pipes stretch, and it goes around the corner kind of like a long tube. It stretches and it comes out of its normal shape. And then the theory is that it comes right back and gets round again, and that's the only correction.
I see. Okay. Let me jump in again because our signal is freezing again a little bit. Let me just get a heads up here from our engineer. Mel, are you able to hear Steve okay? Is Steve breaking up for you? He's not. Okay, that's wonderful. So maybe you're just breaking up for me. Okay, good. So I'm hoping then that our audience is getting this, even if you're breaking up on my signal. But what I heard you say is that these 178 pieces, which are each 40 feet long, get welded, and then they get inserted down this pathway, which then it's angled, and then it has to straighten out. So this pipe that's got all these welds to it is going to be sort of stretched to go around these corners and then to get pushed all, for a mile and a half under the lake. So these welds where the pieces get kind of anchored together are going to be under a lot of tension. And then you're also saying that the law allows it to leak. It's not even illegal for it to leak, if I understood that right, and that there's no way we're going to know whether it's leaking. So what does the Dakota Access Pipeline Company care? Because the law doesn't say that they can't leak, and they have no way to detect it anyhow. And then on top of that, is it correct? Even if they detect it, they have no way to fix it. Is this correct?
You're absolutely right. There's absolutely no way to correct it. Now, I want to also qualify, of course, if that leak reaches a certain threshold, like a catastrophic collapse, a landslide, which is also a significant risk in this area. We've had pipelines that have collapsed recently in North Dakota due to landslide risk. Landslide risks are a very high frequent occurrence. So catastrophic collapse is also a possibility, but what I'm referring to is more of a long, slow leak where you have a crack or a pinhole or something that starts to leak oil. You're right. There's no way to detect it, and there's no reason to report it. And once it does happen, there is no way to fix it and no way to clean it up.
So can you answer the next question, which is, what does it mean for that drinking water that's 90 feet above the leak, and you've got this slow leak which is slowly accumulating? What does it mean for the drinking water and for the 10 or 14 or 17 million people? I've heard different figures quoted, but it's a lot of people who depend on that drinking water, especially the Standing Rock Sioux, but lots of other people downstream throughout middle America who are depending on this water. What does it mean for the quality of the drinking water to have a chronic leak that you can't fix underneath it?
Okay. The thing that will happen first, as you started to point out, is that there will be a period of time where oil will start to leak, and then it's going to leak into the soil, start to contaminate, and eventually those soils around that area are going to become saturated. What's important to also note is that this pipeline is actually installed right at the end of an aquifer formation and right at the beginning of a shale formation. So it's not a matter of if it will contaminate the lake above, but rather how long does it take before the soils get saturated enough, before those aquifers start to naturally into the lake. So it's a fairly given certainty that that's going to happen. When it happens, probably the first way we'll see it is when the inlet water filters on the tribe's water intake start to become plugged more frequently. And I've talked with just as a part of the education process when I was in Standing Rock last week, I met with the managers of the water intake system, and I made sure that they knew they were going to be the first response. In effect, if this ever happens, they're the ones that are going to have to tell the world that we've got a leak. Now, I also want to point out, everybody's focused on the water, but what about the rest of it? And that's where we come into play. That soil that's 92 feet below, as an indigenous native tribe, that means a lot more to us in terms of plant life, in terms of the medicinal things that we have always relied on, in terms of a lot of things, the flora, the fauna. That, regardless of what happens to the water, is going to be affected immediately. And there's an incredible amount of psychological trauma that we're going through as a people right now, knowing that could eventually happen. It's already started. That psychological trauma, since I've been educating people, it's already, we have sacred things that we have, and we don't talk about these issues. This isn't something that is a mainstream topic that we want to share with people. But, we don't impose our religion on people. We don't impose our beliefs on people for them to adopt. And it's just appalling to think that we're not able to have some of those things sacred, and that we're not able to just rely on a good, healthy environment of soil and our flora and our fauna and all our plant life. And that's as appalling and irritating and really just maddening as the water itself. because water is life doesn't mean just the molecules of water to us. It means a lot more. It's a deeper expression. And we're not able to actually translate very clear what water is life means, Miniwachoni. But it's a lot more than just the molecules of water.
Thank you, Steve. Right there, it's just so many reasons why it's really important, I think, for all of us to stand up for the, issues of the sacred land, the sacred soil, for reasons that water is life, whether it is a spiritual issue, whether it is an issue of indigenous rights, or whether it is an issue of the drinking water that we all share, whether it is an issue of the climate that doesn't need this back in oil to be removed from the earth and burned and contribute to climate change. There are so many reasons why all of us, I think, need to keep standing up and supporting the struggle of Standing Rock to stop this pipeline. And for many people who have been passionately involved here, I think knowing the incredible danger of this pipeline to the water, to the soil, to the health of the Standing Rock community, and to everyone, the millions and millions who are at risk for this contamination. It's really important for us to know about this, and really important. I don't know if the Army Corps is still taking comments. I know they have had a document on which people can submit their comments, and maybe we can post that on this Facebook page after this discussion, so that people can try to post them. But I think, in any way that we can, it's really important to keep standing up and resisting. People may have heard that the city of Seattle recently divested from Wells Fargo Bank. A lot of money, billions of dollars, that they are moving out of that bank because of its support for the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I heard today that the City Council for New York City is also divesting some $100+ million that it holds in Citibank. And is also moving that money. So in any way that people can, continue to stand up and stand together. I'm going to read some of the comments here, Steve, that I think people have suggestions and thoughts to share with you. So Colleen Cameron says, my husband is at Standing Rock. Thank you, Colleen. I know some of the people at Standing Rock. Chase Iron Eyes, for example, has put out a call for other able-bodied adults to come and lend a hand, if only to move the site of their camp. And for some, they will be standing their ground. So thank you, Colleen, and thanks to your husband, and stay safe and stay well. Susan says, thank you, Jill and Steve, for standing with Standing Rock. Linda Laurie says, Jill, where can I send money to help Standing Rock water protectors? And I can tell you there is a couple of websites, and we will post them up on this Facebook page. I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but I'll see if I can get a hold of them while we're still broadcasting. And, they can use money, they can use materials, and they can use able-bodied people. Let's see. Lorca BB Diaz says, they announced today that they're planning to build a pipeline under the Potomac to transport gas from Pennsylvania through Maryland. There are different issues with every pipeline. I myself am one of those who opposes all new pipelines simply on account of the climate emergency. In my view, no pipeline is a safe pipeline, and there have been thousands of pipeline accidents over the past 20 years, hundreds of deaths. In my view, all of these pipelines are to be opposed, And let's see, if it's a gas pipeline, then there's always the risk of explosions as well. Steve, I don't know if you have any thoughts offhand about a pipeline under the Potomac and what kind of risks that might pose.
Hearing what your comments are, I agree. I'm also, I wish we would stop with fossil fuels. I really do. And I worked on power plants, and I've worked on pipelines. I'm a realist. I know I'm not going to be able to live in a world until consumer behavior changes where we'll be able to work with renewables. And I'm very encouraged by what's happening in the renewable world. But in the meantime, as a mechanical engineer, I have to make sure that whatever is happening, in particular now with my own relatives, my indigenous people, that if they're going to do pipelines, by God, they've got to do them safely. Potomac River, I don't know anything about the crossing. I don't know, if it's going to be what the situation is. But pipelines effectively have an impact on the environment, whether it's a poisonous oil, whether it's gas, whether coming through. So it's going to have an impact, whether it's an impact on physical or in direct contact, or whether you have an overconcentration of methane that could happen because of leaks that could cause flora and the animal impacts. But there's any number of risks that could happen. So yeah, explosions are one thing. They don't happen that often, but they do happen. But there's a lot of other smaller impacts that happen, and they have an immediate impact. The impacts that I told you about in Standing Rock, those are irreparable harm being caused to the people in Standing Rock. And that's an important thing to note, irreparable harm, because that is something that absolutely cannot be reversed. And that has been completely negated in any consideration. And I want to point out that also in this EA, none of what I told you has been neither studied nor mentioned that DAPL did.
That's unbelievable. This was the first I heard that the pipeline area actually abuts. It goes right up to the edge of an aquifer. I mean, that is just like nuts for this pipeline to be sitting 90 feet underground where this aquifer exists that communicates with the drinking water. Aquifers are basically underwater natural storage areas of clean drinking water. And, it's probably no coincidence that this is happening on indigenous territory. And in fact, this pipeline was moved from Bismarck, where, a Caucasian population says, oh, no, not in my backyard. So, it gets moved into indigenous territory. It's absolutely outrageous, and it speaks to the inherent racism and colonization of indigenous people that this is taking place. And, it's very important that we fight these pipelines everywhere, but especially that we support our indigenous brothers and sisters who are standing up against this pipeline, because that's where the worst damage is likely to happen. And, it's really important that we rally around our brothers and sisters who are putting their lives on the line here, as they are, in order to stop this.
If you weren't upset by this subject before, I'm going to tell you something that does exist in the EA. They did what, in the EA, when they were looking at the routing north of Bismarck and then the Lake Oahe routing, they did what's called a per cap impact. So how many people would be affected if there's a leak? And they had a relatively nice summary of what that meant to the community of Bismarck. But when they did the Lake Oahe crossing, it was 0. The per cap impact was 0. That means there are no people that they need to consider near Lake Oahe. Isn't that appalling?
That's unbelievable. That just says,
Who are you? We're nobody, right?
Exactly. That is just unbelievable. It denies your essential humanity. That is just incredible. So it's really important that we fight this. Let me read off some more questions here, and we'll try to do a lightning round because we just have a few more minutes. And let me just ask everybody who's listening, please like this conversation and share it so we can get this word out. Everybody who's fighting this pipeline needs to be armed with this new information, which is completely undercover right now, under wraps, this new information that this pipeline is extremely dangerous to the drinking water, to the health, to the survival of the Standing Rock community and to everybody downstream. This is absolutely nuts that this is being allowed to go forward. Steve Wolfbrand says, when this rusts out, who's going to know? We just had this problem in Santa Barbara here in California. A pipeline leaked tons of oil into the Pacific. It was a very, very old pipeline. Yeah, and one day this pipeline 90 feet under the ground is going to be very, very old. And what are they going to do? You know, how are they going to like take this out? You know, how are they going to stop this from breaking down? They're never going to know when that happens. Can you speak to that just very briefly, Steve? When this rusts out, who will know?
Well, there is a technology available to do inspections, as I mentioned, of the inner wall of the pipe in the main body, not at all of those welded joints at 40 feet. So that's something that they'll have an idea over time what kind of corrosion happens. I must say that. However, what's going to motivate them to actually self-police and report? Nothing. There's no reason for them until they have a problem that they're outside of the legal bounds of leakage. So, because self-policing and reporting is tantamount to saying, I'm shutting my pipeline down because there's no way to fix it or repair it. If this were a normal pipeline above ground, and this is one of the comparisons, there's a chance they could go in and repair that one section and keep the life of their pipeline going. But when it's that far under, you have effectively terminated your project and your investment. So why would you self-police and report? And I don't trust oil companies. I've been around them my whole life. They're not going to do that.
Yeah, this is just waiting for trouble. And I want to remind people here that Chase Iron Eyes and Dallas Goldtooth have called for massive mobilizations in every city across the country, urging people to please call for local action. Rommel Douglas Ravensblood says, I physically have no way to make the trip, but I would be happy to hold the line in my city. So wherever you are, Rommel, get out and make a lot of noise and stand up with all of us. Beth Lamb says, shout out to Myron Dewey for his drone footage of DAPL, which has been so fabulous. Kathy McCormick says we need to support the farmers also in Iowa and the Midwest who are likely to be affected. Yes, indeed, Kathy, absolutely. When their water supply gets contaminated, you know, what does that do to their farms and to their farm animals and to their families? Molly Ravenko Peters says, how many permanent jobs will this pipeline actually create? My impression is that it's a couple dozen. It's somewhere around 40 or 50, something like that. Do you know, Steve, offhand?
Yeah, there are. I think that actually the number in North Dakota was less than that. I think the number from the beginning of the pipe and then throughout its 1,200-mile traverse across America was about that number, around 30 if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember the exact number, but something like that. So it's nothing. I mean, we've got more people working on the EIS that was just vacated than they're talking about permanent employee. Give me a break.
Unbelievable. And I just want to mention the country of Sweden just adopted a goal of 100% clean renewable energy, complete transition by 2045. And what that means is lots of jobs right now building that clean energy infrastructure. So if we want to talk about jobs, we should talk about the sector of the economy right now that's just growing like gangbusters.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but you know, we've seen a lot of Chinese companies that have done a tremendous job on developing affordable renewables. I've seen it all over the world. I wish more American companies would get in the race. I mean, spend your money and your effort. We've seen the cost of electricity renewables in solar power from Chinese suppliers go from 20 or 30 US cents per kilowatt hour down to 5 cents per kilowatt hour in many parts of Africa. That's just amazing. Why aren't American companies going after this? Spend your resources there, your R&D and your energy. Forget about the oil. You can now produce electricity and energy cheaper than you can with fossil fuel.
I couldn't agree more, and it's important to point out that the U.S. is providing something like $40 billion in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. This is a well-established industry. It's not like it's just getting up and running. Those subsidies should be redirected to jobs in an energy field which is going to be sustainable, which is going to be healthy, which is going to be really good for our economy. We need to move that money, and that's why many of us, Steve, are calling for throwing the bums out who keep us on this boat that's going over the waterfall right now. We really need a politics that is of, by, and for the people that will do the right thing here. Couple more quick questions. Beverly Saunders asks, Steve, what is the average lifetime of an oil pipeline?
An oil pipeline isn't really significantly different than any other industrial installation. Anybody who tells you that the life would be more than 25 to 30 years, and that's only an unknown marketing statement, but we designed for about a 25 to 30-year life.
All right. Colleen Cameron says, check out Chase Iron Eyes, who just provided an update at the Lakota People's Law Project, a live video from a half hour ago. And Mel, who's engineering this call, and a big shout out to Mel. Thank you, Mel. She will be posting the link to that on this Facebook page shortly. And again, kudos and just unbelievable, deep felt gratitude to Chase Iron Eyes for really standing up with the integrity and the courage that all of us need right now. His example is unbelievably inspiring to all of us. Robert Seppi says, thanks to all who work on these fronts in the resistance. And I want to echo that. Thank you to everyone who's out there and standing up. And Art Kozlinski says, thank you for being the only presidential candidate who went to Standing Rock. And I cannot believe that the others did not do that. How could they not go to this absolute ground zero of the crisis in human rights, indigenous rights, the climate, Mother Earth, and our future? The kind of unity and vision that our indigenous brothers and sisters are demonstrating at Standing Rock is really what all of us need to bring us together across the planet, one people on one planet. Steve, do you want to just finish up with any last words here to wrap us up?
Yeah, I would like to say thank you to our leaders that are really fighting the hard fight. Dave Archambault, he's taken it on the chin. That guy fights tirelessly. He's been doing a tremendous job. And I'm going to be the first to say that his heart's in the right place. He is working hard to empower us. I also wanted to make a shout out to my brothers Chase and to Dallas Goldtooth. You can agree or not agree with some of the things that, but these guys have the passion. And I really want to thank all of those guys for the leadership they're doing. I want to thank you, Jill. I really want to thank everybody who's giving us a voice.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will continue to do that. And for people who want to support the water protectors, you can go to sacredstonecamp.org. That's one word, sacredstonecamp.org. And come back and visit us here at the Green News Network, and we will keep you posted. And thank you so much, Steve, for your wonderful work. We will do our best to get the word out, and I hope to stay in touch. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Good night, everyone, from the Green News Network. Take care.